Welcome to the launch of the Big Ideas lecture series from the Stanford Doerr School of Sustainability. My name is Arun Majumdar. I serve as the dean of the school. Let me just give you a little context. Building on 5 years of planning and preparation, the Doerr School of Sustainability was formally launched last fall in 2022, just over a year ago. The school was built on a vision to create a future where humanity and nature can thrive together. Question is, what is needed? So just a little framing. There are 8 billion people going to 10 billion by 2050. We have a $100 trillion economy, global economy, 80% of which is powered by fossil fuels. And given the urgency of climate change, we need to create a whole new paradigm of sustainable development, adaptation measures for communities, and especially underserved ones, and restoration of nature within the next few decades. This will affect every human being and institution around the world because, after all, we're all part of nature. We're talking about the biggest transition and transformation humanity has ever undertaken. This cannot be achieved by extrapolating the past or by incremental small ideas. We need big ideas, and we need innovations. So the Big Ideas lecture series is a special opportunity to bring global thought leaders to Stanford to consider matters of Earth, climate, and society, with a particular emphasis on engaging the entire Stanford University community in these discussions. Talking about global thought leaders, someone who knows a lot about these issues and is doing something about it, and someone who I have found really cares. We are honored to have Bill Gates help us launch this Big Ideas event. Bill is someone who needs no introduction, but let me say something that I said when he came here in 2018, introducing him. For all he has done to save millions of lives from diseases such as HIV, malaria, and others, the reputation of the Nobel Committee will be enhanced by giving him the Nobel Peace Prize. I hope you agree. I hope that each of us will see today's discussion as not just an opportunity to learn and engage, but also be inspired to do something and make a difference. I also want to acknowledge and thank our moderator. My friend, Thomas Jaramillo, is a professor of chemical engineering and of energy science and engineering, and a recognized leader in efforts to develop innovative materials and processes to produce sustainable fuels and chemicals. When we launched the school last fall, I called on the immortal words of Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. that we need to act with a fierce urgency of now. With these afternoon's discussion, that fierce urgency gains momentum. So I want to thank you all for coming here, and let me just give a warm welcome to a Stanford dad, Bill Gates, and to Thomas to come on stage. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Go get him. What a great crowd we have today. So wonderful to see you all. Really my pleasure to serve in this capacity as a moderator, and we can all learn from Mr. Bill Gates today. Bill is many wonderful things. He's an entrepreneur, he's a philanthropist, he's a writer, he's an investor, he's a thought leader, and a mover and shaker in areas that are extremely important to this planet, health and climate, among others. I know many are excited to learn from your thoughts, as am I today. And I just want to say thank you for taking the time to meet with us. You're an inspiration to many. Thank you so much, Bill.
All right.
Super. So I have a number of discussion topics that we're going to dive right into. I also have some questions. I want to thank in advance the many students who submitted questions online. We do have those questions. We'll get to that to the latter part of today's session. But first, I want to start with the origin story. The origin story, many of us recognize your efforts in global health. More recently, you have putting more time and attention into climate, especially through breakthrough ventures and among other activities. And the question I have for now is, how did that begin? How did that pivot start? How did you become interested in climate? And let's start there.
Yeah, so I stepped down as CEO of Microsoft in the year 2000 and then moved to work full-time for the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation in 2008. And my wife at the time, Linda, and I had been looking at, okay, what should all these resources go back to? And we primarily ended up focusing on work in poor countries to improve health. There's a mind-blowing market failure that things like malaria, diarrhea, pneumonia, nutrition simply don't get any investment because the people who suffer from those things are very poor people. And so science isn't grabbing onto those things. And that work has been very, very rewarding. In fact, I was just over at the medical school meeting with researchers there that are helping us come up with new vaccines, a new understanding of nutrition. But it was through the going out in Africa and talking to people there, most of whom are farmers. That's the primary thing people do, just like in the US about a little over 100 years ago. And they would talk about the challenges of having failed crops and less yield, and their yields are only a quarter of rich country yields already because nobody's ever made the seeds or given them the credit for the fertilizer. And so it was through that lens that I thought, okay, I need to learn about climate change, and met people like Ken Caldera, David Keith, and they started explaining to me what I should know, bringing lots of scientists in. That's when Arun and I first met. And so based on that, I was saying, look, this is a innovation problem. And if you look at the hard to abate areas, the amount of activity and innovation was very, very low. The foundation does our climate adaptation work, so all the seed research and everything to help those poor countries, because it fits in with the health work that we do there. But mitigation, energy markets are these gigantic private markets. You've got to get literally hundreds of billions of capital. And so in the Paris climate talks, where I kept saying to France, you've got to get innovation on the agenda, saying that to the White House. They wanted Prime Minister Modi from India to come. Turned out innovation was the reason that he would be willing to come and talk about that India was engaged in that anyway. So we did in 2015, when that Paris Agreement is signed, we did a side event about innovation. It was called Mission Innovation, and I committed to create Breakthrough Energy then. And then in the next few years after that, I raised $1 billion from generous individuals, including John Doerr and many others. And that's when Breakthrough Energy got created. And it has a variety of activities I'm sure we'll touch on. One of them is venture funding only of companies that can have a dramatic effect on reducing climate emissions. And so now there's over 100 companies in that Breakthrough Energy portfolio across every area of emission.
That's outstanding. If I could maybe dive a little bit deeper into that question. So and let me also just say that there's a lesson learned here. I really found it very interesting that you was talking with farmers, thinking about nutrition, that really brought to your attention the issues involving climate and involving energy, and just an encouragement to everybody that you could be going, we have a group of very talented students in the room who are doing some exciting things in lots of areas. Be open to recognizing sometimes there are other problems that emerge. When you're attacking one problem, there might be something else, and a pivot is exactly what's needed. Let me try to draw a little bit more from your insights. I also want to recognize that, I've appreciated so much when you share your thoughts and share your perspectives, how you have really engaged the globe in a way that's very hard for many others to do so, through energy, through climate, and it gives you a vantage point that is somewhat unique. And your willingness to share that knowledge with us and with others is just so important to help inform our activities. And so I guess one question that I have regarding your vantage point is, now if we were to zoom out all the way and just think about global trends in society in general, any trends that you see happening, what are the ones that we should be paying attention to, where the globe has been before, where the globe is now, where society is now, and where society is kind of evolving into the future, because that's the future that we need to connect with, whether we're thinking about new government policies, new economic markets, new tech. So what are some of those global trends that you're seeing?
Well, most trends are extremely positive. I mean, human innovation, our understanding of biology, material science, computer science, that's advancing, including now the ability to use AI to supercharge progress in all of those areas. When you think about progress, there's certain things that would reduce progress, and you want to avoid those, and then you want to accelerate the good progress that's going on. A lot of people are not that aware of the progress that's taking place. In global health, for example, at the turn of the century, over 10 million children died every year under the age of 5, and now we have that down below 5 million. That's because we did new vaccines and got those vaccines to all the world's children. The poor children who were at risk of dying from all these diseases, including diarrhea and pneumonia, just weren't getting the vaccines. And so that type of improvement is kind of mind-blowing, and should make people excited about, wow, how do we do more things like that? The big, scary things, climate's very high on the list, various concerns related to AI. When I grew up, nuclear weapons was a real concern. And it's not like that concern's gone away. I mean, we haven't actually run into the problem. Bioterrorism, and then polarization. So, there's some things we'd like to avoid so we can continue the progress where we're improving the human condition, which over the last several hundred years we've done a fantastic job on.
Mm-hmm. Oh, that's excellent. So all these things that you mentioned, maybe I could ask if we could kind of make it a little bit more concrete in terms of those trends. How is it informing your activities, the things that you're up to today, the things that you have planned for, called the next 5-10 years ahead?
Well, the Gates Foundation will continue to have inequity in health as our primary thing. Some diseases can be eradicated. Polio is the one that we're very close on, and if things go well in the next 2 or 3 years, we should get that to zero, and that would give us the energy and the resources to go after malaria and measles. And in the meantime, we can get the disease burden from all the other diseases down very, very dramatically. We had a goal that the world set through the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals that we were very involved in, to go from the 5 million deaths a year down to 2.5 million by 2030. Mm-hmm. Because of the pandemic, the war in Ukraine, interest rates, a lot of things, we will miss that goal. It'll be somewhere between 2035 and 2040. But even in the face of climate change, indebtedness of African countries, instability, all those things, because of innovation, which is a lot of its profound understandings about nutrition that will help those kids, even if they get sick, survive. Anyway, we'll do that next factor of 2. That gets us to where the world that 2.5% of kids die before the age of 5. The rate in a rich country is like 1%. So you're not at equity, but you're pretty close to achieving the goal of equity.
Super. Now let me ask a question that might get a few people on the edge of their seats. I want to hear what's kind of catching your eye when it comes to innovations in technology for energy and sustainability.
Well, the goal of zero is a very demanding goal. If we were trying to reduce emissions by 20 or 30%, then you would look across the 5 big areas of emissions and saying, okay, let's do the easy ones, and let's not do beef, let's not do aviation, let's not do steel and cement. Let's just do electricity generation, perhaps, or just passenger cars, which are the areas, sadly, it's only a quarter of emissions if you get all of electricity and all of passenger cars. You're 1/4 of the way there, which, because of the nonlinear nature of the phenomena, is essentially not worth doing at all. You don't get any delta T benefit out of a 25% reduction. And so, in Breakthrough, what we do is we review the transport, electricity, industry, agriculture, and buildings. Those are our 5. And we look at, in terms of policies and new ideas, can we innovate so that the services, aviation, passenger cars, those things, are still available with zero emission, where the increased cost, what we call the green premium, has been brought to zero. The theory of change is very much that the middle-income countries that already account for 60% of emissions, and that share will actually go up over time. Mm-hmm. The only way you get them to adopt these clean technologies is if there isn't some gigantic cost to doing that. That is, saying to India, don't build roads, don't build shelter, where they're still trying to achieve basic levels, and their per capita emissions historically are a rounding error of what's causing the problem that we have. And because they're near the equator, just like a lot of Africa is, they're going to suffer dramatically more than temperate zone countries will. Because of that, anyway, we have this theory of trying to get to zero. So anytime we say, oh, wow, there's a new way of making cement that doesn't cost more, or a way of doing industrial heat, or a way of using hydrogen. And so, at this point, in 2015, there was very little going on in climate innovation. I mean, Tesla had been started, but many of the companies that had come to that space, the venture model hadn't worked that well, and people were really staying away from that. And so you could say, like in industrial emissions, there was nothing, which is insane because people were talking about deadlines to get something done, but they hadn't even started the work for the hard things. And they were just so overly focused on electricity and passenger cars, which is great. That's a nice thing. But in no sense does a cheap solar panel help you make beef. It's just different technologies. So I'd say I'm actually enthused about, in each one of those areas, there are companies that, at least at the lab level, have an approach that, once we get it on the learning curve, which is a non-trivial thing, get the volume up, use scale, like work for solar panels and lithium-ion batteries, that we can achieve that zero green premium.
Outstanding. And so that was a great list of possibilities in the mitigation sphere. I was kind of curious about the adaptation area and your thoughts, because likely, I mean, from all I can see, no matter how hard we try, we're going to be facing some issues. We already are facing issues. Those issues are probably going to become more challenging in the next decade ahead. Hopefully we can start pulling things back, but adapting is going to probably be a key part of the strategy. Any thoughts that you'd like to share on the adaptation side of climate?
There will be quite a bit of warming. And in temperate zone countries, the adaptation work is not that dramatic. We know how to adapt the seeds. We know how to prevent forest fires coming in and causing severe damage. We know how to deal with heat waves. So there are things, but largely the U.S. has air conditioning and the amount of outdoor farming where a single bad harvest will cause your children to get malnourished. We don't have that. So most of the adaptation work, it needs to be done for these poor countries who, of course, are responsible for like 2% of emissions even now on today. And so the highest leverage things in adaptation are things in agriculture. Better seeds that are more productive every year, so they can have a buffer stock and savings, and that have also been adapted to deal with the higher temperatures, which is very, very doable. I mean, the Green Revolution, saved billions of lives. It was a phenomenal miracle, but we're not done with that type of agriculture and productivity. And by improving agricultural productivity, you also take away the land pressure where you're deforesting, particularly these tropical forests, to do things like palm oil, soybean, beef grazing. And that, is an aspect of mitigation that these agricultural improvements can make possible. So adaptation doesn't get much in the way of investment, and it needs to.
On that note, on the needs to, how do we create forces to help accomplish that particular goal? I don't think that's an easy question.
Well, the total amount of money that's available, sadly, there is no magic answer. The aid budgets, the generosity of rich countries to poor countries is very, very small. It's like about 0.2% of rich country GDP goes to these things. And our foundation is the strongest lobbyists that should be more generous, that it should go up. But politically, the likelihood of it going up any significant way is very low. In fact, in many countries, including the US, the fear is that would actually go down. So that's the same money that you would use to help with climate adaptation, that you do to buy malaria bed nets, and you buy vaccines, and you fund better seeds for these countries. It's pretty limited. So we do have to be extremely careful how we spend that money. Mm-hmm. Rich countries will pay for the things they need to do for adaptation. I'm not worried about that taking place. It's more the adaptation for the poor countries.
Gotcha. So these are great examples of an intersection of global health with climate. We've got a lot of scholars here who work in those areas and other areas. I was hoping you could maybe elaborate a bit more about that intersection and other intersections of important things in society, because climate is very important and health is important. There's other areas that are important, but also there's the connectivities. It feels like we can get more than just the sum of the parts if we find the right sweet spot. So I was just hoping to pick your brain and, from your vantage point, from all your experience, everything that you've learned, what might you share with us to inspire this group of scholars?
Well, climate is not an end into itself. If people are healthy, they're being educated, they're learning, they're living long lives, then wow, climate must not be that big of a deal. It's only through retarding development. It's a headwind for development because of all those negative effects. And so you really have to say, okay, malaria is showing up at higher altitudes than it ever did before, because Anopheline mosquitoes, when it's cold, they don't do well. And that's why many African cities like Addis Ababa are above where Anophelines, the malaria mosquitoes, thrive. That's changing. So for the first time, we're seeing lots of malaria in that environment, and including a species, Stefansi, that's now adopted to urban type conditions. If you're an outdoor worker, that's where you really experience the heat. If you can't afford air conditioning, your work of farming is inherently an outdoor, very labor-intensive thing. And so it's really through the vector of, can we keep improving these people's lives even in the face of population growth, other environmental issues, and climate change, can the poor countries keep improving? And I believe the answer is yes, but the health effects, for example, Wellcome Trust and our foundation are funding studies on if you're pregnant, during which part of pregnancy does very high temperature affect the outcomes in a negative way, and what's the magnitude of that effect? You'd be surprised how many health-related issues actually aren't well known. That's a study that we'll come back in the next 18 months to understand, and then, okay, what are the interventions for that?
Yeah, I have to say, just hearing you talk about these intersections, these commonalities, really just as part of what excites me about this new Stanford Door School for Sustainability, because you need under one roof, you need to have the people who have expertise in things like health and policy and economics and tech, and at the end of the day, we're trying to solve broad societal problems. These problems can't be solved independently. It really is one solution, one mode of operation, and we're hoping to find the most optimum mode of operation that happens to be sustainable and also good for education and welfare and health of the community. So yeah, I just want to encourage everybody to explore as the new school is only 1 year old. We're growing, but really try to engage that multidisciplinary atmosphere no matter what discipline you're interested in, because that's really, I think, what will be successful for us as a school, not only for those who are formally rostered in the new school, but also those who are outside the school. We're hoping to amplify those activities and hopefully make even stronger connections so that people kind of can find the right avenue to contribute. Outstanding.
That's fantastic. No, I love the new school.
It's exciting indeed. So I wanted to talk a little bit about early stage R&D, and there's a lot of early stage R&D that happens on this campus and many other places. At the end of the day, we don't know what's going to be the winning solution, whether in any domain. We need early stage R&D. We need to take that down the pathway to grow and to scale. I was hoping to get your insights into early stage R&D and how you think, what could we do to foster that better, especially given the environment that we have here. We're university labs. We have a SLAC national lab as well that does a lot of fundamental R&D. How could we take on that activity in a way that might be more ready to scale solutions as they emerge? Hoping to kind of pick your brain on that. You've been part of it, you've lived it, you've witnessed it, taking early stage things all the way to massive scale. Love to get your thoughts.
Yeah, so when we started Breakthrough and raised that first $1 billion and hired people and said, okay, we're only going to invest in things that if they're successful, that alone will reduce over 0.5% of emissions. We had no idea if we'd find anything to fund. After all, there'd been no funding in that area. And people like Václav Smil, the very best author in the area of energy, had pointed out that the simplicity of the digital model, how quickly things move, the lack of physical infrastructure, that anybody who came out of the digital realm would be mind-blowingly naive about how hard it is to change the way we make steel. And he likes to point out, hey, the way we make steel has only changed a few times, and why do you think it can change? Well, as we got going, and like classes here at Stanford, like the one that David Danielson gives, a lot of students came forward and said, hey, I'm going to learn about this because of climate. So whether it's batteries or agriculture, the number of these startups that have a connection to Stanford is actually very high. This is the location that more of these have come together. Now, part of that is that the U.S. attracts smart people from all over the world. Most other countries are mostly dependent on their native talent, minus whatever leaves their country. Here in the U.S., we get, it's such a melting pot of great thinking, including, universities like this. And so I guess I shouldn't have been surprised that over 80% of the companies and we have no bias towards the U.S. We'll fund climate technologies wherever they're found, but over 80% are here, well, in the United States, and even a lot of those are here in this area. And it's partly the infrastructure that you talked about. So, risk capital. There are things that do carry over from successful digital investing. The length of the fund does not carry over. You need, we chose more like 20 years. So we've made some modifications, but many of the people involved with this came from that digital realm. And so, we bring some things, but with appropriate modification. And now, even Václav is amazed. He's still like, okay, I don't know, it's hard to roll these things out. But even so, he's amazed at the number of good ideas, including in steel. And there's almost, there's like 5 different new approaches, of which probably there's room for 2 of them to be the ultimate low-cost green way of making steel.
Yeah, another pearl of wisdom. Yeah, don't get bogged down with conventional wisdom, and be ready to kind of, take on a fresh perspective. We need it, that's for sure. I wanted to ask about, on that note, we have a lot of folks in the room who are working on early stage R&D, and the way I view the globe, the world that we live in today, right? It came through what I'm just going to call an organic process by which scholars from decades, if not centuries ago, came up with some ideas, some proofs of concept. Ultimately, somebody picked up on that basic research got translated into maybe a commercial entity that maybe grew or maybe didn't. And now we have this web of a society where things are highly interconnected, markets, policy, tech, to do all the things that we do, to live our high quality of life that those of us in this room happen to have. Not everybody does. And a lot of us in this room have aspirations of taking some early stage R&D and turning it into something big and getting there urgently because we have a big problem to address and we need to do it fast. What advice would you give to that community here on how they can prepare themselves? They might be working on at the milligram scale, at the 1 square centimeter scale. What advice would you give them that they should be doing now to prepare them to maybe take that or something else to scale later on? That's not conventional in our typical academic disciplines, I would say.
Well, the pipeline starts with R&D, and government. Fortunately, the U.S. government, funds a lot of R&D. Not as much in the climate space as I think they should, but more in absolute than any other government. And some of that, comes to work that gets done here. The next stage is Breakthrough Energy has a thing called fellows, and there's other similar constructs where you can get money where you don't really have an investable plan yet, but you have a scientific approach that maybe at the bench level, at least seems to show promise. And so through our fellows program, we've done a lot of companies. And then we have the ventures group where you can at least put some numbers on a spreadsheet and make it look like there's some real potential. And then you actually have to do projects. And our group that helps with that scale-up piece is called Catalyst. So Breakthrough Energy, underneath that umbrella, you have policy work, including telling governments their R&D ought to be higher, but then this pipeline of R&D, fellows, ventures, and then Catalyst. And the number of skill sets needed, to shepherd something through all those stages, it's finance, it's marketing, it's politics, at those very, very early stages, it's deep science, material science, chemical science, food science, and so that's the type of person who's going to be there at the beginning. But then they need to build a team of all those other skills and work in concert to get to where they really can have climate impact. For climate products, one thing that's hard is, unlike software, with software you can always find some customer whose needs aren't met, and you can always sell it at first at a very low price and get on the learning curve. You know, when you make steel and cement, it's not going to be better than today's steel or better than today. There isn't some niche that you're going to serve. And so the bootstrap to be economic and the conservatism of the buyers in terms of the current way of making those things, you know, the reliability is very important. You know, when you build a building with cement and 20 years later there's an earthquake and you hope that it works. And so that piece about, wow, what is that bootstrap market is far more difficult in this space. And that's why, you know, policy work and great finance marketing people are part of the magic equation.
Absolutely, and I maybe pause for a moment and kind of resonate on that theme a little bit. You know, again, I'm looking at a room of scholars who have the skills that Bill just described in finance, in markets, in business, in tech, and I think that's a key thing for any solution to be scalable. It needs to have all those dimensions and a roadmap. And so, you know, this community, how one can engage each other to build those teams, to start thinking about things up front, I think could be very helpful, number one. And number two, in the new school, we do have something that is pretty unique, and that is an accelerator within the context of a university. And the accelerator, the way I would describe it, with reference to what Bill was just describing, it's somewhere in between what you just described at breakthrough and, say, basic research. Right, so it's kind of fitting that sweet spot where the goal is to organize teams that can start thinking, how do I answer questions that are very relevant, like reliability, recognizing that whoever you sell to is going to care much more about the reliability perhaps than some other cool feature, just knowing that they can trust it because they've been buying from some other vendor for the past 50 years and that stuff is reliable. So just really trying to answer different types of questions than you might otherwise from a basic research perspective. So yeah, please, the accelerator is building out. I've been fortunate to be part of it since we first, Arun and I back in the day, having some discussions along with many others on the need for this in the community, and just encourage everyone to keep an eye out. We're trying to move and shake in our own right and provide opportunities for people to contribute on projects, not just in the tech world, but in markets, in policy, et cetera, to try to take things where you can have an impact more rapidly and go faster and farther ahead. So please keep an eye.
That boundary, the academia to startup boundary, will be an important one. Not the only important boundary, but you know, given that we have this deadline of wanting to get temperature down as quickly as possible, even though you know we won't meet some of those goals. Anything like the accelerator that can get these things out faster is really a fantastic contribution.
I agree fully, and also identifying the right problems to tackle. Some problems might have a bigger lever than others, and in a world of academic research, which is really curiosity-driven, and let me assure you, we need that. We need lots of curiosity-driven research because that's really provides the fundamental insights as to how the world works, whether, again, it's in tech or in medicine or in policy work or economics, et cetera. These are all really important foundations upon which real solutions ultimately emerge. So we definitely need more of that, but I think really providing some new outlets in addition that can complement curiosity-driven research and be more challenge-driven research to really look at problems from a different lens to see what might actually work, what might actually be scalable, what are the true obstacles I should be tackling. You know, that's an important piece for those of you who want to have that impact more directly. The sooner one can start building skills on how to think about that and assess that, I think the faster we can roll out those solutions. Very cool. I do want to talk about markets for a moment. So, right, as a technologist myself, you know, in SunCat, the SunCat Center for Interface Science and Catalysis, among many other centers and research groups out here, we're really trying to develop technological solutions. But clearly we recognize that any solution requires a market that's willing to accept that. And so I was just kind of curious about the market structures, recognizing that across our entire economy, across every sector, it's going to be important to decarbonize, to take climate into account. I was kind of curious about your view of the current market structure as to how our universe works, and you know, how do we shift that to help enable a new society to emerge?
Well, the rich countries really have to do two things. They have to set an example for the world by getting their emissions down to zero, and they have to use that activity to innovate in such a way that it wasn't brute force. And that is, they're not just using tons of money to make, super expensive aviation fuel or super expensive cement, because your adoption into these middle-income countries that are responsible for all those emissions, it just won't happen. They'll turn to you and say, are you willing to subsidize it? That's trillions of dollars. It won't, even if it should happen, the collective action problem will not be solved without innovating the cost down very, very dramatically. How that happens in rich countries, it's a mix of carbon taxes on the current things. So if you make the current thing more expensive, then the new green thing is clearly, it's easier for it to compete. If you give a tax credit to the new thing, it's more capable of competing. And so this so-called IRA bill provided tax credits to a lot of technologies. For example, $3 a kilogram tax credit for green hydrogen, which is pretty generous, and hopefully will create all the different approaches there will be tried out and compete with each other. And hopefully, even after that tax credit goes away, they will have gotten down the learning curve in a very big way. Ideally, you have not just rich countries, but also rich companies agreeing to buy these things and invest in these things. You have rich individuals who want to show that they're zeroing out their emissions, and so that's almost a non-market thing to do that bootstrap. And then as you get to the zero green premium, then markets can kick in at the gigantic scales they provide.
Yeah, outstanding. You mentioned policy and some of the policy drivers that exist today. I'm very grateful that we have these policies in place and that there's been a lot of motion in recent years. If you could change type of question, if you could change one or two policies or create one or two new policies that don't exist today that you think could really move the needle, what might those be? Whether here in the US or elsewhere or
Well, the dilemma
globally?
that we've got right now is really two dilemmas. One is that climate's become a little bit political. So you have one party who says, okay, Green New Deal in 10 years, and another party who says, you can guess which is which, maybe this is not even a priority. And sadly, because of the long-term nature of these investments, building new factories, replacing all this infrastructure, if half the time you're in stop mode and half the time you're in, we can get this done, super quickly mode, which even that's not realistic, then you're not going to come up with a solution. So, that's a problem. And connected to that problem is the fact that as push comes to shove and you tell people, hey, everybody needs to buy an electric car, everybody needs to buy an electric heat pump, the people who care about climate, only some of them are really willing to experience a decline in income in order to help out with that. There's a general view of a lot of people who care about climate and find somebody else to pay the bill. And so we've seen, when France put a diesel tax on, or, Germany had a mandate for electric heat pumps, or the UK, had a notion that, they should start winding down the factories for cars because they weren't going to let those be sold by 2030. But we have a real issue that as people start to see these costs, it really does make them think, well, not me. And how do you square that circle? Well, again, innovation getting those premiums down is probably the only way you're going to be able to maintain climate progress without creating this backlash that plays into that somewhat partisan view of the issue. So, if I had one wish, it would be to get everybody committed to this cause and to be looking for the minimal cost for how to achieve it through innovation.
Yep. Absolutely wonderful. Let me transition now. I have some more questions I would like to ask you, Bill, but I'm gonna honor our wonderful student community who were so diligent to send us some fantastic questions on different topics. So let's switch gears, and we'll see if we have time, and I can maybe ask one or two more. So first, the first question is about artificial intelligence, which you mentioned earlier. This is a question from an undergraduate student by the name of Frank Can. Thank you very much, Frank. And the question is, what role do you think AI will play in our research and innovation towards a sustainable environment and society?
Well, AI is going to accelerate scientific discovery in every field. So whether it's discovering new drugs by simulating quantum field theory, we're already, the foundation works with Microsoft to, come up with TB drugs that have been derived from this. Material science, some of the deep questions. Many of the things we thought we might need a quantum computer to do, it looks like these AI techniques will actually give us some of those insights that would be very important for low-cost solutions. Our climate modeling will get a lot better. Our work on seeds will get a lot better. So it is this wild, incredible, amazing accelerant that the science domain is just one of many that will never be the same.
Outstanding. All right, next question comes from Shivani Upadhyay, and it's on financing climate solutions. The question is, what is the best way to finance climate adaptation solutions, especially in emerging markets that are suffering disproportionate impacts from the climate crisis while not being high emitters historically? This is a graduate student in our Graduate School of Business.
Yeah, so most adaptation requires grant money. In climate, you hear numbers and different types of money. Often, money, when you get to the big numbers, it's okay, let's go raise debt or equity. Those things only works when there's a return, in a financial return, in things like making better seeds for poor farmers or buying vaccines for the children in poor countries. That's got to be grant money, philanthropic money, not something where you ever get a financial return on it. And that's partly why adaptation is so hard. Today, the things that are called adaptation, the impact per dollar spent on most of them is super low. And there is a problem that if you're trying to achieve a current climate adaptation goal, like $100 billion a year, you're going to take money away from vaccines. I mean, there's literally a question of when the money is raised for vaccines, whether we'll fall dramatically short of what we've been able to raise in the past, because there's very finite money. This grant aid money that goes from rich countries to poor countries, it should be a lot bigger. But given how scarce it is, we have to spend it very, very wisely. And there's certainly a justice issue here, but justice when you go across borders isn't quite as vivid as domestic justice. And that's why we're fighting over this less than 0.5% of the budget for all of these worthy causes.
Challenging indeed, an opportunity for those of you. We need some new ideas, I think, in that space on how to make that happen. It's not a simple problem. Next question is on nuclear power. This is coming from a graduate student in civil and environmental engineering, Andreas Mühlbauer. The question is there a role for nuclear power in a future energy system given the remarkable cost reduction in renewable electricity generation and energy storage systems? I think I might know what you'll say on this, but I'd love to, let's get you to say it.
Yeah, so if you take these open source grid models and you look at, let's call it the green grid, which will have to generate far more electricity, say 2.5 times as much, because your cars, your steel factories, your buses, they're all being powered by electricity instead of direct use of other hydrocarbons. And so this green grid is very hard to build. And you can ask these simulator software that we fund to build a green grid where you assume no fission and no fusion, and just basically solar and wind. And what you see in terms of the amount of permitting and amount of transmission and speed of building you'd require, that is not going to happen anytime soon. And in terms of reliability, now you've got heating houses, which is a very large non-sheddable load. That load comes in exactly when you have cold fronts, which is when you have no solar and no wind. So the weather correlation is a huge problem. There's some mistaken models that were done that sort of said, oh, this can be done. But as people looked at that, it was clear that would be extremely difficult. So even though nuclear fission has many challenges and nuclear fusion has many challenges, I think it's very important that we invest in solving those problems. We can't count on them. We may have to do that other approach, as hard as that would be. But if you mix into that model non-weather dependent baseload storage, that the density of energy generation is very, very high, and you can put those near to where your power loads are. So you're not building transcontinental transmission, which has never been permitted, and who knows if it's likely to. The politics of that are there's no light at the end of the tunnel on what we need to do for transmission. And so, I hope that fission comes through. I should note I have a bias. Not to make money, but to have it potentially emerge as a climate solution. I put over $1 billion into a company called TerraPower that is building a next generation nuclear plant in Wyoming right now. And it has a lot of characteristics, like it only generates electricity when the renewables aren't available. It accumulates heat continuously, but then into a salt pool. It only generates when it's needed. So it's designed to coexist with renewables. And we should build renewables as fast as we can. Likewise, breakthroughs in 4 of 16 fusion companies, including Commonwealth Fusion Systems, that has kind of a best case date for electricity generation of about 2035. So hopefully those two come in. The scale of what geothermal can be is also a little bit of a wild card, and there's 2 companies working in that area. So yes, I think we should be open-minded because it's so important to solve climate, and we should be able to solve the economic problems, the waste problems, the safety problems, both in fission and fusion.
So many important things that you mentioned there, just to touch base and resonate on the importance of modeling at the systems level. It's easy for us to think about our little piece of the puzzle and just try to make that as good and clean and cheap as we possibly can. But the question is, how does it fit within the overall system? And that system modeling is pointing in directions that inspire future areas of research and development. So just one important part, and also really trying to figure out what is the real problem. And most nuclear reactors are not designed to couple to intermittent or variable renewables. And so just recognizing that that's the opportunity potentially here, that you would design your system differently in the first place. So just wanted to uncover a few things there and resonate. The next question is on the concrete sector. This comes from Connor Hoffman, an undergraduate student. The question is, you've invested greatly in reducing carbon emissions in the concrete sector. What strategies can be used to take these companies to scale, and how quickly can they be implemented?
Yeah, so when I went to high school, nobody explained to me about cement. I had to wait to read Schmiel and realize, wow, what a miracle. I mean, it is, in terms of mass, it's the thing that humans do the most, and that's why you get roads and buildings. And it is super cheap, particularly in Asia. It is very, very cheap. And you get emissions partly because you're converting limestone, which is calcium carbonate, into calcium, and so you have a CO2 molecule that's going off as you do that process. And however you you generate the heat, which is usually burning natural gas or coal, to perform that process. And so you get literally a ton of CO2 for every ton of cement. And if you just did brute force carbon capture using today's technology, that cement would cost over twice as much. So the green premium is over 100%. There are a number of companies in our portfolio, the breakthrough portfolio, and there's some outside our portfolio, that either by not starting with limestone or by doing carbon capture as they use that limestone, where they get to zero or actually negative emissions for cement. So this is the one where if you'd asked me in 2015, what would be the hardest, I would have put this at the top of the list. And now I feel very good, although the results aren't in scale plants. So we're at that, okay, let's go build some plants with, it's about 4 different technologies, and make sure that we're right about this. And then you have to suffuse that across the world. You can look at a map of how many cement plants are in the world. It's kind of mind-blowing. It's way more than, say, electricity generation. Super.
I think we have time for maybe one last question. And given the hour, I'm going to ask you to answer in 30 seconds or less, Bill. Here we go. It is one piece of advice that you would give this talented group of scholars who have a whole career ahead of them in society. One piece of advice.
Climate's a super complex problem, and it's an opportunity to learn politics, economics, and the number of sciences. I mean, I had to read Weather for Dummies and, try and get, okay, what is this phenomena? So, I think your contribution will be in some specialized area, but learning the broad phenomena and the various sciences that gives you an opportunity to get amazed by, I think it's fascinating. So we need people who bring kind of a holistic view of the problem in addition to their deep specialization.
Outstanding. With that, let's thank Mr. Bill Gates. Thank you so much for your time.